Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this meeting in August of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition. We appreciate you joining us by Zoom today. We're also recording this, so it'll be posted later on our website. So if anybody misses it or wants to go back and review some information, you can do that. I want to thank Mark Quam for being our Zoom master and making these meetings possible, where people can be joining from not only all over our region, but other places as well. The format we're going to have today, I've got a few things I'm going to go through in terms of an update, and then we can just open the meeting to any comments or questions, that sort of thing. So I'm going to share my screen, and I actually don't even remember now if I introduced myself. So I'm Scott Rogers. I'm the chair of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition. I'll talk a little bit more about the coalition in just a couple minutes. And what I'm doing today actually is I took a presentation I was able to give to the Eau Claire Chamber of Commerce Eggs and Issues breakfast in July. The chamber, and I'm actually the vice president of governmental affairs there, has been a long time proponent of passenger rail service to our region. In fact, Jackie Pavelskis, who is on the call, is the person that introduced me to the coalition, because she was doing what I'm doing in 2002 when I moved to town and became an active investor in the chamber, and I got involved after that. So the coalition's been around for a while, and we have a monthly policy breakfast for chamber investors called Eggs and Issues, and our theme in July was actually planes, trains, automobiles, and more. And we talked about the future of transportation to our community. And I had a chance to give a brief presentation about the history of the Rail Coalition and what we're working on now. I have updated it because there is some new information, and some things have even happened since July 15th when that was, and mostly in the positive direction. So this is what we're talking about when we say West Central Wisconsin. Really the counties east from the Twin Cities to Eau Claire, and even a little bit farther east. And when we talk about that question of passenger rail service, a lot of times what people think of, there we go, is the 400. If you talk to longtime natives of this area, they'll say, yeah, I remember riding the 400. It may not have looked like a steam engine like it did in the 30s, but it did look like this near the end of its tenure. At the end of its tenure, it was a diesel powered train. Here's a busy crowd at Eau Claire getting on the train, probably in the late 50s. But we haven't had scheduled passenger rail service to the communities in West Central Wisconsin since July of 1963, and we just passed that anniversary last month. And a lot of that is because of what our society invested in terms of transportation for many years, mostly highways and airports. And this is what we envisioned was wide open highways and easy travel to and from communities. And a lot of times the reality is that we have congestion. If you have to drive everywhere, there's the fatigue and the efforts of driving. We can have weather. And we used to show this slide a while back when gas was high, that gas is expensive. It went down, but then it's gone back up again, and it goes back and forth. But we do feel at the coalition that economic, demographic, social, and transportation issues are converging to make trains more important to our future here in Wisconsin. The genesis of the Rail Coalition was actually this map. If you're not familiar with it, this is a map of the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative, which is a multi-state effort initially led by Wisconsin to build out a system in the Midwest that would have passenger rail service radiating out of Chicago and serving most of these states. And many of the leaders of our community, when this was released in the late 1990s, took note of the map, and it's maybe small on your screen, but you can see there's just a dotted red line up to Eau Claire, and nothing between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities. And so the initial effort of the Rail Coalition and the leaders of it were to say, hey, wait a minute, we have a important metropolitan and growing population area in our part of the state, and we ought to be considered for this. And the Rail Coalition was formed initially as a committee of what was then Momentum Chippewa Valley, now the 10-county Momentum West. And here are some of the founders who were foresighted senior leaders in our community and actually have since moved on. The late Owen Ayers, Bill Leinenkugel, Ray Willoughby, and we appreciate the foresight they had to help get this ball rolling. The mission of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition is to provide leadership and coordination for passenger rail service, really for balanced transportation system for our area, for our economy, really. And much of the initial leadership did come from the business community and from education. Starting out as a committee of Momentum a few years ago, we became a 501c3 nonprofit research organization. I just have on the screen here our current board of directors and officers. Steve Yon from Momentum West, their director, is an ex officio, and also Eric Anderson, who's our local MPO director at West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning. But as the Rail Coalition looked at this, we noted a number of things about our region and why we ought to be considered for passenger rail service. So continue to be among the fastest growing counties and cities in Wisconsin. We have quality of life and housing affordability in general. We have significant institutions of higher education with particularly the UW schools have large populations of students from other parts of Wisconsin and from Minnesota because of the tuition reciprocity. And then we just have a lot of commerce already along I-94. We had, I don't know the current counts, but the vehicle crossings at the St. Croix River Bridge at Hudson before the pandemic were something over 100,000 vehicles per day. And then we look at it as the importance of retaining and attracting talent to our area. Royal Credit Union's been interested in our project for a long time. And this was a quote from a letter that they provided to us supporting this as a means of helping them with their attraction and retention of talent. And as you can see, in fact, I need to update this map because RCU has actually grown since this map was shown, and they have really locations all across the corridor that we're talking about. So initially, the effort of the coalition was to literally get on the map so that when maps would be shown of future passenger rail service and then subsequently planning in Wisconsin that this corridor would be included. And one of the first steps was in 2004, Wisconsin DOT commissioned a study, and it looked at other parts of the state that were not already included in the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative. And it concluded that there were two possibilities for a passenger rail service through our region that were feasible based on the expected ridership and economics. And that was what they called the Eau Claire plus La Crosse scenario, where on your Chicago to Twin Cities route, you would route some trains through La Crosse and some through Eau Claire. Also finding that the Eau Claire to Twin Cities by itself was also a feasible corridor to consider. Subsequently, there have been other maps that indeed show this as future service. Even the Minnesota rail plan, we are not in Minnesota, but we already noted the significant commerce between our region and the Twin Cities and other parts of Minnesota included Eau Claire to the Twin Cities in their phase one. And then this is the current Wisconsin State Rail Plan, and it shows a line through our region as a future corridor connection. Then there are other maps. So there's lots of maps to talk about here. This map does not specifically talk about service through our region, but it is a recent high-level study that the Federal Railroad Administration made for a guide for future investments in passenger rail service from the federal government's perspective. And it shows Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, and the Twin Cities as one of the highest and most important corridors. And of course, we lie on that corridor, and we certainly hope that we would be included as it's developed. Also recently, you may have seen the Amtrak Connects Us map. This is as discussions began last year about significantly increasing federal investment in passenger rail as part of overall increased investment in infrastructure. And they released a map of places they thought made sense to expand service. And I'll zoom in on this later, but there is a line that includes service through our region. And then just looking at other maps people have published, this is from the High Speed Rail Alliance. They're working on the importance of Chicago as a hub for passenger rail service, highlighting a lot of the current and future routes out of Chicago that have high probability and would benefit actually even Chicago having service. And you can see if you look closely at Wisconsin, that routes in Wisconsin, such as through Eau Claire and Green Bay, are included. High Speed Rail Alliance actually has even published a preliminary map of looking at Wisconsin and saying if we had a commitment to passenger rail in our state, here's a map that it might look like. And finally, there's a map published by All Aboard Northwest. It's an advocacy group in the Northwestern states, primarily looking at long distance service and especially at restoring service to the former North Coast Hiawatha route between Chicago, the Twin Cities, southern North Dakota, southern Montana, cities such as Billings and Missoula, and on to Portland and Seattle, as well as the old former Pioneer route from Utah up through Boise, Idaho, Eastern Oregon, and into Portland. And in fact, and what I'll mention there is they do include in yellow as a possible future long distance route, possibly one of those trains running through our region. So you might, if you did end up with the North Coast Hiawatha and the Empire Builder, if the Empire Builder continued to run through La Crosse, perhaps the long distance North Coast Hiawatha could run through Eau Claire. And a lot of times we talk about passenger rail being a back to the future exercise. Those of you who recognize the picture or even saw it in its heyday, here's a picture of the depot in Eau Claire from the teens of the last century, so the 19 teens. And it's hard to read here, but the name on that observation car of that train is the North Coast Limited, which was the historic train that ran between the Twin Cities, southern North Dakota and southern Montana. And for a few years before 1918, it actually did run on the Chicago Northwestern through Eau Claire. I mentioned All Aboard Northwest. The Big Sky Rail Authority in Montana and others are sponsoring a Greater Northwest Passenger Rail Summit next week in Billings, but it's also available virtually. And Mark Quam is actually part of the planning for that. So Mark, would you want to just kind of briefly tell us what that conference is about and what's going on there?
Sure. The Great Northwest Rail Summit, it's really about introducing a regional passenger rail system, not just for Montana and the Pacific Northwest, but really all the way into the Midwest. And the goal is to get an Amtrak service or some type of passenger rail service, or the North Coast Hiawatha, which used to run through Billings and Missoula, southern part of Montana, to get that rail service restored. And I think that'll really have a significant impact, not just on Montana, but really for services going to Spokane, Seattle, and of course into Minneapolis, St. Paul, and through Wisconsin. And the Big Sky Rail Authority, which is made up of several different counties in Montana, they really felt having a conference, would be really beneficial to, spur more interest. And so I got involved with the Rail Summit basically through All Aboard Minnesota and All Aboard Wisconsin. And they actually do plan to make this summit hopefully an annual event. There is some discussion about maybe having it next year in Boise, but really the significance of the summit is to really kind of address passenger rail service and some of the economic benefits. I know at the conference that we're doing, which will be virtual or in person, they're going to address different things such as transportation equity, tourism, also environmental benefits. There's also going to be Jim Matthews from the Rail Passengers Association, which I'm involved with, will be speaking. And also, there are going to be different breakout sessions, some dealing with freight and rail passenger synchronicity, also, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, some opportunities analysis for funding, and then there'll be some breakout sessions on the legal and political aspects of doing a passenger rail route restoration. So it should be a good event. It's going to run both days, and if you're still interested, you can sign up virtually. There is information to sign up online, but really, I think the overall impact is to really get more people engaged at all levels, whether it's state, local, or federal government levels, businesses, chambers, and so forth. So, yeah, I'm really hoping we have a good turnout for that, and I think it'll be a major impact for getting, rail service connected, not just out there, but really for other connecting routes that can connect to Montana. So that's kind of, that'll be Monday, August 22nd and Tuesday, August 23rd. So back to you, Scott.
All right. Thanks, Mark. And I would have actually loved to have gone, and I had an impossible event to change on Monday, so I'm not able to go, but I was actually asked to be on one of the panels on Tuesday afternoon. It's going to talk about some of the work to get, I think, planning and political work to get passenger rail service implemented. I think Peter Fletcher from La Crosse Area Planning is also on that panel. And if you, as Mark said, if you still want to participate and can't go to Montana next week, there is a virtual option. You can Google Greater Northwest Passenger Rail Summit. I'm sure it'll come up. And then most of you, or probably everybody on this call today, received an email from the coalition last week about this event. And there was also a link there if you wanted to learn more about that. So that's coming up next week. And we'll tell you more about it later. So as the Rail Coalition got recognized on the maps, we recognized also that just being on a map isn't the whole thing. It's the first step. And so over the last several years, the Rail Coalition has looked at other things around the country that have moved towards, or something we can emulate or learn from in terms of advocating for and future operations of passenger rail service. And so one of the things is the commissions and authorities that have been part of either effective operation, so like the Northern New England Passenger Rail Authority or the San Joaquin Joint Powers Authority, are organizations that actually sponsor passenger rail service. In their cases, they hire Amtrak to run it, but they have a much significant role in managing those services and making sure they're locally responsive and as cost effective as possible. There's also been other commissions like the Great River Rail Commission in Minnesota, the Southern Rail Commission down along the Gulf Coast, the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority, which formed in Montana, as Mark had already mentioned, and even the 8-state Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, that these can be important bodies. And I'll talk a minute about what we've done with that information. And then we've also looked at things like what the development and traffic and economic activity around stations when you have frequent service can do for a community and to support the service. And so we've been closely watching Brightline in Florida. That's an entirely private operation. They happen to already own the tracks and the station sites. And so they've been able to do economic development, real estate around the stations. And that's been an important part of their overall economic justification for the service. And then we've also seen places like Normal, Illinois, which is a Normal Bloomington mid-sized community in central Illinois with a state university connected to Chicago and St. Louis. They developed a new station site in downtown Normal, have seen significant economic development around it. And that's a vision that we could probably see for our communities in West Central Wisconsin. The Hartford line is on here because that's one of the so far the only intercity line in the U.S. sponsored by a state or a locality where it's operated by a contract operator rather than Amtrak, and that's one that Herzog, one of the contract operators in the country, won the bid to do that. And in fact, they do cooperate with Amtrak because there's even Amtrak services on that same line between New Haven, Hartford, and Springfield. So that was an interesting thing to see. And then I have the Hiawatha service on here, and part of it's looking at Wisconsin itself. Wisconsin has been very successful in sponsoring passenger rail service on the Chicago to Milwaukee corridor. Before the pandemic, its trains were in record ridership and has been 7 round trips a day, but they've been working and getting federal grants to be able to make track improvements, to have future increases in frequencies. And that service actually has recovered significantly in terms of ridership. Right now, Amtrak is having some real issues with equipment availability. A lot of those trains are running sold out, although they're running a little bit shorter than they were because Amtrak doesn't have enough coaches right now. There is more equipment coming online, but Wisconsin's been recognized for its program with Amtrak. And one of the great things about that service is that it runs largely on time with a 90–95% on time performance, making it a very convenient way for people to go between those cities. And that's one of the factors that has made it successful. And Wisconsin really has also been successful at getting federal grants even before the recent bipartisan infrastructure law, and held a ceremony earlier this year at La Crosse, celebrating the implementation of what's being known as TCMC, which is Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago. And it's the second train on the current route, originating in St. Paul and running at a different time of day between the Twin Cities and Chicago. Initially an extension of one of the schedules from Chicago to Milwaukee. And WISDOT and MnDOT have also foreseen that, including shuttle connections to offline cities like Eau Claire, Rochester, and Madison as interim steps to increasing service there. I mentioned the Great River Rail Commission when I showed you some of the bodies that have been organized to work on passenger rail service issues. The TCMC, I should say, has been fully funded from the capital side. Minnesota is in the process of confirming its operating funds, which are relatively small amount. And right now, Amtrak and the states are saying that service will likely start sometime soon, probably no later than next summer. One of the things that has advanced the schedule on it being able to start is Amtrak reached an agreement with Canadian Pacific, which operates the service, and they have agreed to start that train sooner than all the track improvements that have been funding take place, as long as those track improvements are guaranteed and that they will indeed go forward. So they are all working together to see how soon they can get that service started. I had an opportunity a couple of weeks ago. The Great River Rail Commission took members of its commission and several elected officials from Minnesota, including the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee in Minnesota, as well as other state senators and state representatives and stakeholders along the line, particularly from the counties on the Great River Rail Commission, including places like Winona, Red Wing, and the Twin Cities. Took a trip to Milwaukee, left on Thursday morning, and fortunately the Empire Builder was on time all the way, and had an experience on the train. Some of the people had never ridden Amtrak before, and so it was a good opportunity for them to do that. And then in Milwaukee on Friday, well, here I'll talk a little bit more about the trip. I took a selfie in the Winona station. They did get some press coverage. That's Derek James from Amtrak being interviewed by WXOW out of La Crosse in front of the train while it made the Winona stop for crew change and fresh air break. And then in Milwaukee, there were about 20 some people on this trip. Had an opportunity hosted by the consulting firm HNTB. This is, you see Arun Rao from Amtrak and Derek James there at the front of the room talking about the Amtrak Nexus effort and some of the things Amtrak's doing to get this service started. The group had a ride on the streetcar, tour of the streetcar facilities there, a tour of the intermodal station, and then actually a meeting with a number of community and transportation leaders from Southeast Wisconsin to talk about passenger rail and what the Wisconsin could do to move it forward. So as the Rail Coalition has undertaken all of this and we look at what's going on, we really have identified how we might get passenger rail service to a region and what it might look like. And there really are three efforts, and we really believe these are all complementary and all should be happening. One is one we've been talking about for quite a while, and that is frequent regional service from Eau Claire to the Twin Cities. It's a reasonably short corridor. There's a lot of commerce, and it would be a little bit more straightforward to get it started. Also through service from Chicago to Milwaukee to the Twin Cities. And that's the idea shown in that Amtrak Connexus map, as well as the state rail plan, that you may have some of the additional frequencies when you do the third or fourth train from Chicago to the Twin Cities, that a train or more could operate via Eau Claire. Also with the FRA Midwest plan and the long distance service, there could be other through service running all the way to Milwaukee and Chicago from Eau Claire. And then throughway shuttle connections from our corridor cities to existing Amtrak stations, such as the Chippewa Valley to Toma. So when I showed you the TCMC map, the fact how this would work is, and this is very successful in many other parts of the country, particularly California, where it's included in the system and the timetables, et cetera. The idea would be you'd be able to buy a ticket that takes you, say, from Eau Claire to Milwaukee, and what it would include is a shuttle from Eau Claire to Toma, and then you would board the train and go to Milwaukee. Wisconsin already has started this kind of service recently in 2019, and I understand it's growing in ridership now again, now that the pandemic is over. And they have, on the Chicago to Milwaukee service, two of those trains have a direct connection to a dedicated bus that goes from Milwaukee up to Fond du Lac, Oshkosh, Appleton, and Green Bay. And it's that idea where you can buy a ticket through from, say, Chicago to Green Bay and ride a bus twice a day. And in fact, WISDOT provided us with this at one of our meetings a few months ago, a potential schedule for if you did start the shuttle connection from Menominee and Eau Claire to Toma, and also did it for the Empire Builder. These are the kinds of schedules you could look at as possibly going forward. So as we've talked, we have seen really Eau Claire to the Twin Cities as really the first phase of moving forward with passenger rail service. But eventually, of course, we want to be on a through route. That would be using the Union Pacific tracks between St. Paul and Eau Claire, Altoona. Working with Union Pacific, they've done PTC signaling, done a lot of track improvements, and they are open to looking at passenger rail service. Important part of making it successful would be having auto competitive travel times, about an hour and a half. We've talked about having 4 round trips a day so that there's enough frequency to be convenient to people. Potential stations, Eau Claire, Menominee, Baldwin, the Hudson River Falls area, Stillwater possibly, and also St. Paul. You would have food and drink, Wi-Fi on board, be able to take bicycles. Have suggested that perhaps the fares would be $25 to $35 with certain kinds of discounts and maybe even higher level service for an additional fee. So that's just an idea. Of course, that all of that information will be fleshed out as we go forward. So we've been talking about this for a while, and how do you advance this? And all of us who have been involved in this know that this has been talked about for a while. And so sometimes people say, well, is this ever going to happen? And one of the positives we have is that we have been working up for a while, and we're not just starting from scratch. And the holdup has always been, given the significant public investment in other modes and the very limited investment available for rail, the funding has really always been the issue. And the bipartisan infrastructure law passed last year really is a game changer. The Federal Railroad Administration has been tasked with taking a significant amount of money over the next 5 years, including significant advanced appropriations, which are not subject to the annual appropriation every year in Congress, and putting programs together to make localities eligible to put corridors together and move forward on one. So the fact that we've done work already And we have a corridor that is more ready for passenger rail service than many others that might not have signal systems or lower quality track conditions are things in our favor. And here is a visual representation from FRA is just how significant this change is. So we're looking here at an annual fiscal year amount of passenger rail investment by the federal government. You can see back in 2009, there was a one and part of another year where it went up quite a bit. They weren't really ready for that, and maybe could have gotten more benefit from it, but then it flattened out at a low level for a long time. And then just look at how much it is annually here, a significant part of that being advanced appropriations. And then also the green line here, if you can see it, are the competitive grants. And so these are the ones that are out there for not only Amtrak, but localities and states to be able to take advantage of. And as I've also mentioned, Wisconsin has been pretty successful in the existing programs. And so we have a track record as a state to be able to move forward on that. This spring, after the law was signed last fall, in May, the FRA published in the Federal Register its plans for a corridor identification and development program. Basically talked about the criteria that were going to be used to create a pipeline of services. And I'll talk in a minute about its invitation for expressions of interest. There's going to be additional guidance from FRA coming out probably in the fourth quarter. Just what are the next steps? What kind of funding availability will there be in the first year for things like service development plans and environmental planning? So as we look at what are possibilities for our area under that program, of course, we talk about the Amtrak Connexus plan, and that is, this is a close-up on their website of the routes in Wisconsin. And so Amtrak, we understand, is doing analysis of all of these routes. And what's significant here that I didn't mention is Arun Rao, who was with WisDOT for 20 years and the last 10 as passenger rail program manager. He went to work last month for Amtrak as director of network development for the central states. And so obviously he's very familiar with Wisconsin and is working on how Amtrak could do some service expansion, such as in Wisconsin to Green Bay, through service through Eau Claire to the Twin Cities, as well as future service to Madison. And then if you've been participating in our meetings, you know that we have also been talking to the Association for Innovative Passenger Rail Operations. It's the trade association of these four contract carriers, as well as some other entities such as unions and rail construction firms. And they have others that they're talking about being part of that. These are names that if you follow passenger rail or transportation, you may have heard of them. If you are a traveler and you just know what it looks like when you take a commuter train or an Amtrak train somewhere, you may never have seen these names unless you saw a little bit of detail like this is operated by. These are organizations that do contract operation. An example would be Herzog. This is a map of, and I don't expect you to read this, but a map showing where they do contract operations. And so they run commuter rail services, streetcars, and other kinds of transit. And I understand they carry as many passengers and run as many trains as Amtrak does annually. They just don't do it under their name. I mentioned CT Rail in Connecticut before. They are the operator of that intercity service. And this is actually a list of all four of these firms and a few of the places that they operate. So if you've been to Milwaukee and ridden the streetcar, that's actually operated under contract for the city by Transdev. And Keolis is actually a sister organization of the French National Railways. And so you could say their organization actually operates high-speed rail, which would be the TGV in France. This organization has expressed a strong interest because of their good relationship with Union Pacific and Union Pacific's interest in working with contract operators like this in looking at the Twin Cities to Eau Claire route as a possible contract operation for the regional commission for the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin, or whatever makes sense going forward. And so I'll talk a minute about what's probably going to happen next there as well. And that really brings me to the Chippewa St. Croix Rail Commission. We mentioned earlier that one of the things we've learned is when there's a local jurisdiction watching, managing, and sponsoring services, that is a very significant positive in making sure that they're effective. WSDOT actually has fulfilled that role quite well in the Chicago to Milwaukee. They have been very involved in marketing that service, making sure that there are good relationships and future improvements with Canadian Pacific and others. And we took the lesson from there, and as we had already seen support and resolutions, et cetera, from our local jurisdictions, the idea was generated that a commission could be formed along our route, with the Rail Coalition continuing to take the role of being the advocacy group, the research group, and the Chippewa St. Croix Rail Commission being the representative of the public side of it, and being eligible for grant funding for things like the FRA program, et cetera. And so last year, 9 entities, so it was the counties of St. Croix, Dunn, and Eau Claire, and then the municipalities of Altoona, Eau Claire, Menominee, Baldwin, New Richmond, and Hudson passed resolutions to form the commission. With COVID challenges and meetings, it's taken a little while to get it off the ground and formed, but it had a few remote meetings last year, but approved the bylaws this spring, started having in-person meetings, and has been able to move forward with officers and get the commission going. And it has also invited some ex officio entities to be part of it. So just to explain it a little bit, going into the weeds a little bit, the commission at its first in-person meeting said that they would like our coalition to be a voting member of the commission. And so there's a bylaws amendment pending to make that happen. And then the bylaws also allow for ex officio invitees. So ex officio is an organization or an individual or an entity that is part of a commission like this, not as a voting member, but as a stakeholder and an important part of actually implementing the service. And so the commission decided to invite the list of organizations you see here, which would be the Departments of Transportation of Wisconsin and Minnesota, West Central Regional Planning Commission, which is also the Metropolitan Planning Organization for Eau Claire and Chippewa Falls, Union Pacific Railroad, and then also the 2 counties in Minnesota on the initial route, which would be Ramsey and Washington counties. And I believe now all of these entities, those entities, in fact, all the entities listed here have accepted the ex officio, and most of them have started participating in the meetings. The commission also wanted to include the institutions of higher learning. So that's UW Eau Claire, UW Stout, River Falls, Chippewa Valley Technical College, and Northwood Tech, which also covers the Hudson area. And so, as I mentioned, it was formed through these resolutions that were passed by each community, and we've talked about those in the past. So one of the things the commission is working on, and in fact, it had a meeting just yesterday, was taking advantage of this opportunity in the Federal Railroad Administration to be part of the pipeline. And the first step in the pipeline is something the FRA is calling an expression of interest. And that's simply, in a way, raising your hand or putting your name on the list to say, this is being worked on, and we as an entity that's qualified to say this, we are going to be applying to be in this program, but it's really an idea that FRA will know what's out there and what might be coming. And so at its July meeting, the commission voted to move forward towards submitting 2 expressions of interest. One would be for the Eau Claire to Twin Cities, and one would be for a through route from from Chicago and Milwaukee to Eau Claire and on the Twin Cities. And at yesterday's meeting, I should mention that Jim Dunning is the representative from Eau Claire County. He's also the chair of the commission. He's on the call today too, so he can jump in if I speak anything. But Jim appointed a committee yesterday, a subcommittee per the resolution, and they'll be drafting the expressions of interest. And then at the September meeting, the commission will approve whatever those submissions are going to be and submitting them to the FRA. And then we'll be sort of waiting for FRA to reveal in the fourth quarter what it's going to require in terms of the next steps to apply to be in the program. Although we have some clues to that, and I will mention that we had some discussions of this whole area yesterday. We did have Lisa Stern from Wisconsin DOT was at that meeting, as well as Greg Mathis from Minnesota DOT. So some of the discussion came up with who can submit expressions of interest and do you need to do them jointly. And Minnesota and Wisconsin are coordinating on what they're going to submit as states. They will each submit their own. We also know that the cities of Milwaukee, Watertown, and Madison have already submitted an expression of interest for the extension of the Hiawatha corridor to Madison. And really the indication was, Arun Rao was there from Amtrak as well. And the indication was that it is a positive and appropriate for multiple expressions of interest to come in for the same corridors. And so they actually encourage us to go ahead and create those expressions of interest to FRA. The other important piece that the commission is working on, and we've talked about it at our meetings as well as at the Rail Coalition board meetings, is moving forward with a process that the AI Pro group has for when they look at a corridor and consider how it might be implemented by a contract operator. They do a process they call a market sounding, which is they bring together really all of the entities that have interest in operating the service, providing equipment, sponsoring the funding, local communities, et cetera, and their 4 members. And they come in and they do a roll up your sleeves all day meeting with non-disclosure agreements so that it's private, just digging into the corridor and saying, what are our challenges to taking this forward, and can we come up with a realistic proposal for how you would implement this corridor? And so AI Pro made a proposal to the commission that it would like to do a market sounding probably in the fourth quarter of this year, maybe towards November. And then to be able to put it together, Ray Chambers, who manages AI Pro on contract, and this is with the blessing of AI Pro, has made a proposal to the commission to administer that. So that would be doing all of the legwork to pull the event together and then taking the results of the market sounding and moving it to the next step with FRA. Ray proposed to do that. And he also brings in other consultants like John Brennan, who is the former staffer in Congress, former counsel for Union Pacific, and formerly at the Federal Transit Administration, would be part of this process as well. And the AI Pro carriers and Union Pacific have said that they would like to see this go forward. So he made a proposal to the commission that he would do this his firm would do this for $12,000, which seemed to be reasonable. The commission voted to ask its voting members to voluntarily each contribute $3,000 to the commission, not only for that, but also for other potential expenses the commission may have over the next year as it works to advance our corridor. The Rail Coalition is not yet a voting member because it's pending a bylaws. There's going to be a special meeting on that pretty soon for us coming on board as a member. Our board met last week, and the board did vote for the Rail Coalition to make the $3,000 contribution to help make this service go forward. So those are a few of the details. Really kind of in wrapping up, I just did want to kind of look out ahead and say, today, if you were going to make a trip to the Twin Cities, you certainly might envision this. In fact, Jim Dunning and Jeremy Gregor, who is the Eau Claire City Council representative on the commission met in Menominee yesterday. We drove over to Menominee on I-94, and the eastbound lane looked like this. In fact, it was moving very slow. And so high traffic is something you never know whether you're going to encounter. And so in a few years, we hope that an alternative to go to the Twin Cities or Milwaukee, instead of like that, it might look like this. Also, students being able to take the train or others from the universities. This is a photo in the 40s in Menominee. This is a current photo of a train in Champaign, Illinois, one of the cities that has service now and is very heavily used by students. Families being able to take the train, tourists coming to our area using our bike trails or enjoying our music or other amenities. And then, as we mentioned, bus connections, where if there's an offline city like River Falls or Chippewa Falls, that the train would have direct connections so that people could take advantage of that. So here's the information on our coalition. If you don't already have it, we do have a website and a Facebook page. We appreciate Dan Schillinger has been helping us maintain our communications. And if you go to the website, there's a green button there that says join. So if you'd like to join the coalition, it's not required to be involved, but we certainly appreciate that. Or if you've been a member and you haven't renewed lately, we would welcome your participation as well. So lots going on. I could have even gone into more detail, but I thought I would share all those with folks and open it up to questions and comments if anybody has in the next few minutes. Or if Jim and Ann have been involved in the commission as well. So if you have any comments you'd like to add about where we're going with that.
Scott, this is Bill Anderson. I think it'd be appropriate to kind of explain how much we're working with AI Pro, and the $12,000 is such a small amount for the services that they're offering us. We're real fortunate to have tied up with them.
That's correct. This goes back to the work we've already done. Basically, what's happening is they are talking to other people, and there are other prospects perhaps going forward, but ours is sort of the most ready to jump on board, if you will. And a lot of that is actually Union Pacific's interest as well, but the other aspects of the corridor, the current condition, it's not that there won't need to be track improvements, but compared to other places that are looking at it. And then it's also a fresh start. So there's no legacy service, which, we wish we had passenger service now, but the fact that there's no other service on the line, you're kind of starting from scratch. It does create other challenges. We're gonna have to look at station sites and how that'll be developed. So Jackie, did you have your hand up?
I did. I wanted to ask you about the bylaws. You had indicated, at the Rail Commission, they discussed that. Is that the bylaws for the St. Croix bylaws, or is it something to do with the participation of the Rail Coalition?
It's so the bylaws were drafted. They were passed last spring at the first in-person meeting of the coalition. The way the bylaws were originally drafted by the Corporation Council, the 9 entities were the voting members, and then they had the ex officio. As the discussion went forward about who should be ex officio members, the voting members of the commission said, when we created the commission, we had representation from the Rail Coalition, but it's not in our bylaws now. We want the Rail Coalition to be a voting member. Okay. And so Sharon McElwain, the Corporation Counsel for Eau Claire County, drafted some amendments to the bylaws to make the Rail Coalition a voting member. And what's been happening in the couple summer meetings we've had since then, we didn't have quite enough voting members present for a 2/3 majority to be able to act on the bylaws. And so that was really kind of the holdup in getting them approved. And Eau Claire County, which is, we also need to thank because they've been handling the administration of the commission. They're working on setting up a special online meeting of the commissioners so that they can act on the bylaws. The other thing to note, just as an aside, so we had 5 of the 9 members of the commission attending yesterday's meeting, but we had almost all of the ex officio members, which was really good. We had a great discussion. Comments from Lindsay Douglas from Union Pacific, from Lisa Stern from WISDOT, from Greg from MnDOT, and then also Greg Baxter from Greg Baxter from Herzog actually came in person because of the importance they see of this, and was there to answer questions.
In addition, Scott, will they address the new role of the coalition in regards to advocacy, that type of thing?
Jim, would you want to make a comment here? I think my sense when we discussed ex officio, because there were other entities, they thought, oh, we thought, this also could be ex officio. We could look at,
True.
Somebody representing the Chambers of Commerce, others.
True.
And I think the conclusion of the commission was the ex officio members would be those that are involved primarily in actually implementing the service or making it go forward. And then because we have the Rail Coalition already, it's the voice, if you will, for the rest of the stakeholders.
Okay.
Is that the way you kind of interpreted it, Jim? Yeah, and you're still muted. So.
Yes, that's what I interpreted also.
Okay.
And Jackie, what was your question? Was I missed the word that you called?
I was asking about the bylaws. Would they be addressing the new role of advocacy mainly? And you touched it with inclusion of the stakeholders with the chamber and et cetera, because that's all out there and it's not been really addressed. And I was wondering if that's going to be incorporated in the bylaws.
I think essentially by making the Rail Coalition a voting member, what they've done is say, Rail Coalition, you go out and advocate for this. You try to make things happen. You bring the business community and tourism and others along, and you're at the table representing those interests. And then the commission itself is the sort of implementer of service, or the one that works with FRA and those as an official representative of the public.
Going along with that, going along with that, you've got the Wisconsin DOT and you've got Minnesota DOT, so you have quite a combination here to coordinate, if you will, in that ex officio group. And
we also have the West Central Regional Planning, which covers this whole area also. So that's a big part of it. And so I'm sure we'll be getting all of the business development arms of the various local governments that are along the route will become involved. In fact, yesterday we asked the representatives to start looking at depots. Where do you want it to stop at? So there's a lot of advanced planning that's already starting. So people are getting warned.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
This is Mark Quam. Scott, I have a question regarding the expression of interest that the Rail Commission will be doing. I was on the Federal Railway Administration's website and looked at some of the current expressions of interest that have been posted. And do you know, or does anyone else know, can individuals or say rail advocacy organizations submit expression of interest other than, a public entity? Because based on what I'm seeing, it looks like they're taking, expression of interest comments from just about all sectors. I don't know. What is your thought or intake on that, or anyone for that matter?
There is a specific list on the FRA notice as to who are eligible entities. What I would guess, and I haven't done that yet, so we actually appointed a subcommittee to put together the expression of interest, and it's actually Jim, Ann Shell, Jeremy Gregor, and me. And so we're gonna work on that in the next few weeks to figure out what is the appropriate way to do it. And one of the steps is to actually look at what ones have already been submitted. So for instance, Lisa Stern mentioned the one that Pewaukee, Watertown, and Madison put in. So that's certainly one we're going to want to see how they did it. If you look at the instructions, they're very straightforward. It says who's submitting this and what are the endpoints of the corridor. I think you want to include a little more information than that. The instructions, Mark, are, and I haven't looked at it, so you've seen it. It says you go to the, there is a Federal Register location or a place you go online to submit this. There's probably not anything that keeps anybody from actually going on that site and submitting something. So maybe that's what you're seeing, but there is fairly clear information on the FRA notice as to who's eligible. So I don't know if that's what you're seeing, Mark. I'm just thinking that if you saw somebody submitted one that, you know, they're not a government, or they're not an intergovernmental commission, or they're not a state, or one of the people on that list, there's probably nothing preventing you from putting something in on that docket.
Yeah, I guess what kind of threw me off, because initially what you're explaining, that I always thought, you know, you had to be a certain entity or qualified to do that. But having looked at some of the current comments already submitted on the FRA's docket, I'm seeing, for instance, there was an individual from Houston, Texas, and, you know, she just had made some comments. So I might actually check with the FRA to see if they're, you know, if just general comments are submitted or allowed, because I guess that's what kind of threw me off a little bit. And I did notice the California High-Speed Rail Association had posted a letter document on the FRA website too. So I'm seeing a variety of stuff, you know, in the comments. Obviously, maybe there's some leeway on that, but yeah, I certainly understand the other aspect of it too.
Jackie.
Going along those lines, Scott, Mark, I had the same kind of question too. But one of the things I wondered is if, like, say, for example, if the Rail Coalition is now part of that in an ex officio capacity, still is an organization that would qualify to write that expression of interest, only because it's been done from that organization for a long time. Whether you look at the white papers that have been created, whether you look at, you know, some of the papers that were saying why this is important in terms of the Midwest or getting through Wisconsin, you know, this overall coordination efforts. And the Rail Coalition took a real leading role in that at one time. And maybe that would be a greater recognition of those efforts and the aspects of how we tried to initially coordinate. And so I'm thinking, would they be eligible? And so I have not looked at that FRA requirements, but I did note that same issue coming up, or would come. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we'll continue to look at that. One of the,
that's all.
One of the things we've done in the past is when Wisconsin and Minnesota were applying for the CRISI grant and the Restoration Enhancement Grant for TCMC, we submitted letters of support.
Sure.
And that's part of the what needs to happen when you actually make grant requests too. So there'll be, I didn't go into the details, but well, maybe I did mention this. So the next steps in the pipeline are likely to be an FRA notice of funding opportunities for service development plans, and then for environmental or NEPA funding. We don't know yet what those percentages are going to be. There's some indication that the service development plans will be very generous from the FRA because they need to get this pipeline going. And it isn't that entities are sitting there on funding that they have ready to match. And so it may be quite generous in a way that makes it relatively easy for somebody who has a strong corridor to get some funding to do a service development plan.
This is Mark Quam again. One question I had regarding WSDOT, have there been any indications from WSDOT as to who Ron Rawls' replacement will be at this point, or any indication?
I had a phone conversation with Lisa. So Lisa Stern, who I mentioned, is director of the Bureau of Railroads and Harbors. So she was Arun's boss, and she said those are big shoes. I talked to her a couple weeks ago. She said they're big shoes to fill. They're working on it. So I think they're kind of in the early stages of posting it and getting candidates.
All right.
But that is a big loss. When I was in Milwaukee, Arun was there. I had a chance to have coffee with him at the end of the meeting, and he was confident that WSDOT would be able to continue what they're doing, and that they'll get his position hired. All right, it's 9 o'clock. Anybody have any final questions or comments? We appreciate your taking the time to join us today, and hope you can, if you have time, join us next week, or join the Great Northwest Passenger Rail Summit next week if you have time. This, I believe, will get posted on YouTube. So if you missed any of it or want to recommend anybody see this, and then we'll continue to keep you informed of what's going on with the Chippewa St. Croix Rail Commission. It will have a meeting in September, and we'll get the word out about that too if anybody's interested. So happy travels, and thanks everybody for joining us today.